Welcome to the Life in the Red podcast presented by the Lincoln Journal-Star, your source for Husker news, analysis, and more. From football in the fall to recruiting in the summer, we've got you covered. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Basnett, Parker Gabriel, and Stephen M. Sipple.
3, 2, 1.
Welcome in, Life in the Red podcast. I'm Chris. There's Parker. No Steve today, but we're going to muddle through somehow. It is
Right.
It's going to be it's going to be a difficult day.
Be tough.
We'll get through it though. It's 3:08 p.m. on April Fool's Day, April 1st, 2022. And this is no joke. Steve actually is not here. This is not some prank we're pranking you guys, because we would not do that. So we're going to keep this one relatively shortish today. Probably we'll talk a little hoops. We'll talk a little football, spring game 1 week and 1 day away. Is that right? Yeah. It's next weekend. Yeah. That's what I thought.
It's sort of been like that. Someone tweeted at me on Wednesday. I said, "Oh, you know what it was about?" And we'll talk about it later. It was about the kid from TCU, O'Shawn Mathis, visiting. And I said next weekend for the spring game. And someone tweeted back at me. They're like, "That's next weekend." And then I was like, "Oh shit, do I have this wrong?"
Yeah.
But no, I don't. It is next. It's a week.
It's next weekend. It's April 9th, 2022.
Yeah.
Memorial Stadium.
Yes.
We will be there. You guys will be there. Sipple will be there, hopefully, God willing. And we're going to talk about it then. We're going to talk about it now, too. But first, A little hoops. Shout out to the Wofford Terriers, by the way. That's the shirt I'm wearing, in case anybody was wondering.
You got Wofford. The little man had St. Peter's on. Was repping some St. Peter's swag.
Yeah, my mom bought. Yeah, my mom bought my son a little St. Peter's Peacocks T-shirt. Dad likes to collect the obscure college mascot T-shirts. He got a Delaware Blue Hens hoodie in the mail today, and so Grandma bought the grandson a little St. Peter's Peacocks T-shirt that he'll be wearing. Dad's very excited about that. Mom less excited, because Mom likes to dress him in, like nice stuff that normally.
Well, she'll be excited when Shaheen Hollowell starts recruiting him to St. John's.
Exactly. Yeah. Seton Hall.
That's right. Yeah. Sorry, my bad.
How dare you? Yeah.
Sorry, Shaheen.
Don't confuse the boroughs like that. They get very angry up there if you do that. So anyway, hoops. Speaking of coaching changes, not many happening for Nebraska basketball. We kind of found out this week. We know that obviously Fred Hoiberg will be back. We know Nate Lenzer will be back. We found out this week Armand Gates will be back. That leaves one assistant coaching spot to fill. Armand was maybe one of the guys that was, I guess, rumored or speculated that he might move on if given the opportunity. His brother taking the head coaching job at Mizzou. And so there was kind of a natural connection there if he wanted to do that, or maybe step into his brother's role at Cleveland State as the head coach. But Armand Gates staying at Nebraska for another year, confirmed by Fred Hoiberg to me last week this week during the Creighton, Nebraska baseball game. Shout out to Creighton, Nebraska baseball. So Armand's staying on staff. What a game. We'll talk a little baseball later, even though there's not much to talk about. Anyway, so yeah, Armand, it's kind of like Armand's third go round almost.
Yeah.
He coached for Tim Miles, then he stayed on when Fred Hoiberg came to Lincoln with Matt Abdelmassi and Bobby Lutz and Doc Sadler and the whole crew, and now he's staying here again as the team and the coaching staff and the structure of everything gets a makeover. So it's interesting to me. I think it's good. I think I come down on it's good that he's staying, and here's why. Because one, he'll provide some continuity along with Fred, obviously, and along with Nate for the players that come back. Maybe more importantly, with what Nebraska's probably going to do now with recruiting, as in actually send all three of their coaches out to recruit rather than one. Armand's got a ton of connections in the Chicago area. That's where he's from. Nebraska's, you can go back even just the last 5-6 years and look all the guys Nebraska's pulled out of Chicago. Glenn Watson, Isaiah Roby from an hour or two away, Ed Morrow before he transferred. They've gone into Chicago and gotten guys. And keeping a guy like Armand Gates on staff who has those deep connections in Chicago, that's going to help Nebraska a lot. I think it kind of simplifies the recruiting side of it a little bit, and maybe kind of crystallizes what they'll look for, what they'll need in that third assistant. From a recruiting standpoint, anyway, you've got Nate Lenzer, who's kind of handled the in-state stuff. the last couple months. They just recently had Cale Jacobson from Ashland Greenwood in on a visit, offered him a preferred walk-on spot. You've got Armand Gates, who can kind of handle the Chicago area, Midwest area. Now maybe you look towards the guy who's maybe got a little bit more of a national connection in the recruiting, or even international, if you want to go that route, or if you want to get into a West Coast or an East Coast or some specific region. So I think it kind of clarifies things there. So there's a lot of positives, I think, that come from this. Now, you might look at this on the surface and say, well, we were promised all these changes, and there's not a lot of changes. And on the surface, there's not. You're going to have one new assistant coach, essentially, and there's been a few guys transfer out, nobody that's really played significant minutes. We know Derek Walker's coming back, Trey McGowan's, Lat Mayan still to make a decision. So you're looking at maybe, at most, maybe one or two more transfers coming in, depending on what those guys do. So on the surface, it's not going to look a whole lot different next year, which tells you that a lot of these changes that were talked about a month or two ago are mostly going to be behind the scenes stuff, the way it sounds. I'm going to be interested to sit down with Fred Hoiberg here when the dust settles after the Final Four and kind of get his thoughts on that and what that may look like. So, yeah, Armand Gates staying. I think, like I say, I think it's good for Nebraska. He's a guy that really relates well to the players. I think this is going to give him a chance to actually show what he can do more as a coach than maybe he has the previous couple of years.
That's what I find so interesting is, like, I think that it's fascinating to me that at the end of the day, what is the biggest change and really the thrust of the change that Fred Hoiberg's making in his program is essentially Matt Abdelmassih, right? And the way that Matt's role structured and had an effect on what everybody else on the staff did. I mean, I've heard some people say or ask, like, how can Armand be that good of a recruiter if he hasn't gotten any players since he's been at Nebraska? And it's like, well, you could be a great shooter, but if you're never asked to shoot the ball, like, how's anyone going to know? And that's sort of like, that seems to be, you know more about this than I do, Baz, but that seems to be, it just was how they were structured. Like,
yeah, it was.
Did essentially all of the recruiting. And so I think even though it's just the one guy, and obviously Doc had a big impact on the program, even though he wasn't an on-floor coach last year. So that's a lot of familiarity for Fred Hoiberg out the door between those two guys. But, you know, with Gates in particular, being a Chicago guy, I get the sense, and of course you can draw it up and say, man, this should really work. And it's got to actually work in practice. But given Fred's history in Chicago and being a Midwest guy himself, it seems like the sort of ingredients are there for that to be a productive combination of Gates being the guy on the, boots on the ground, recruiting the Midwest and Chicago in particular, and then having Fred be there to close, and to say, hey, this is, that's a pretty good. Now, you never know how a guy's stock is, especially with the rate that they've lost at here since he's been a coach. But you could think of worse combinations of guys, other than Armand Gates and Fred Hoiberg, to say, hey, we're going to go into Chicago and we're going to find some guys that can really help us.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's one of the shifts you might see is maybe more of a Midwestern focus out of Nebraska. And obviously, being Nebraska, you have to recruit nationally, and you have to look in the portal, and you have to do all those sorts of things. But I think it can start, in the Midwest, and you don't have to. And we use this comparison with a lot of sports, but look at what Wisconsin does every year. Look at the guys they go and get. It's Minnesota guys. It's in-state guys. So having a guy like that, having a guy like Armand's staff that can go into Chicago, can go into Minnesota, can go into some of these different places, and has the familiarity with the Midwest, that's, I think, maybe signals another direction they might go. And not that Nebraska's not getting players from different parts of the country. Bryce McGowan's from South Carolina, so is his brother Trey. CJ Wilcher's from New Jersey. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. But I think what you might see is maybe a trend more towards a more regionalized approach for Nebraska. And maybe that's not such a bad thing. What was one of the things we talked about all basketball season? It was, well, these guys don't seem to fit together very well. It seems disjointed and things like that. And we don't know what happened behind the scenes and things like that. But you have guys from a similar part of the country with somewhat similar backgrounds, maybe that helps in that regard. So again, we'll see what it looks like, in the next year at least. We don't know if there will be a couple of years, depending on how next year goes. But you can kind of start to get a sense of the direction things are headed with just the way this staff's shaping up, the way the recruiting's shaping up. The one guy they've added so far is a kid from Lincoln, Nebraska, Sam Griesel, who was reached out to by Fred Hoiberg when he went to the portal. So, there was some familiarity there already. So, yeah, it's the most interesting 10-win team of all time. It's the most interesting team in the history of basketball. It's won 24 games the last 3 years, just because I think you might see a roster that's going to stay largely intact. Now they're going to lose some guys. Obviously you're losing, CJ Wilcher, Kobe Webster, maybe Lat, maybe Trey, Bryce. So the number of guys you're losing has the chance to be high. But at the same time, the number of guys you're going to have back has the chance to be pretty high as well. And there's going to be some stability there, and certainly some stability with a guy like Sam Griesel coming in to play in the backcourt, local kid, all those sorts of things. So, yeah, there's going to be turnover, but it's a different vibe, I think, than we've seen the last few years, where it's just been almost a complete reset going into each season. You've just seen this mass exodus of guys. It's not going to look like that this year. And I don't know that it'll look like that going forward if Fred does stick around after next season.
So before, let's talk a little bit about the roster, but before that, so there is the one spot to fill. So Baz, if you had to check all the boxes, like what is Fred looking for to fill that one staff spot? Like, what does he need out of that coach that would be coming in?
Well, that's the interesting part. It seems to me it's almost like it's similar to Scott Frost's situation, right? Like Fred has his offense that he wants to run. You probably aren't going to see him bring in like a quote unquote offensive coordinator, and I don't think they need to do it. I think what they run can work. And it did work. They proved it could work the last few games of the year, and at different times throughout the year. But at the same time, do you need to go find like a defensive-minded guy? Do you need to go find like a Doc Sadler type that can also recruit and coach and bring in some fresh ideas on defense? Maybe. You look at Nebraska, not that they've been good in any area, but they've been really bad defensively in the conference for most of Fred's tenure. They were pretty good. Not this season, but last season when Doc was kind of running things. I think they were 40th nationally in defensive efficiency. So do you bring in somebody that can get you back to that level? Do you go for more of a guy that has a defensive focus and maybe has a recruiting focus in a different part of the country, the South or the East or whatever it may be? I can see him going in that direction. But at the end of the day, it's got to fit with what Fred wants. I mean, it's going to be a different guy no matter who he brings in. It's going to be a guy that maybe Fred isn't totally familiar with, but do you go more of a defensive-minded guy, or do you bring in a guy that maybe aligns more with what Fred wants to do and play a ton of offense and try and overwhelm teams that way? So it's interesting to me, just because you don't necessarily have, defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, all that sort of stuff in basketball, but you can kind of see where Nebraska could go this direction or go this direction based on what they need and what they need to look for. So that's hoops. Yeah,
that's hoops. And then with Walker coming back, last thing, Baz, like, are they? And then obviously they've got Blaze Keita, big man, coming in. We're gonna see some. Maybe not Twin Towers action, but is that how does that look? Obviously, there's a long way to go, and you got to see match skill sets and all that. But yeah, that's not the style that Fred's normally played. Two bigs on the floor, unless one of them is a point forward type, which neither, as far as I can tell, those guys are. So
neither Blaze nor Derek will be bringing the ball up.
Bringing the ball up the floor. So that sort of sets up the next iteration of interesting challenges for the offseason, right? Is figuring out how to get the most out of who was probably your steadiest player in Derek Walker, coming back now for a 6th year. Get more rebounding out, and some post presence out of Blaze, and still play the way that you want to play.
Yeah, we can throw Wilhelm Breidenbach into this too. Sure. Let's not forget about him. And a lot of this is going to depend on his recovery going through the summer and things like that. But you're talking, Wilhelm's 6'10", kid is 6'11", I believe, listed 6'11". Derek 6'8". So you have the potential to be really, really big. across your front line. And with a guy like Wilhelm, there's your guy that can maybe step out and shoot a three or bring the ball up the court in certain situations if you need him to. So it's going to be a super, super interesting lineup. It's kind of almost shocking to me they were able to keep that recruiting class all together. They're going to get all four guys on campus, it sounds like. And look, like those guys are going to help. Like Ramel Lloyd's going to come in and help right away. He played high level prep school ball this year. Blaze Chieda, he's going to have to adjust. He's coming from JUCO to Big Ten, and we think he's going to be solid. He's an older guy, but you still got to make that adjustment. That's a big one, coming from JUCO up to Power 5 level basketball, Power Conference level basketball. So it might take him some time, but at the same time, he can come in and help you. He's big body. Jamarcus Lawrence is a guy that's played high level prep hoops. Can he come in and help you right away? Denham Dawson's been in the program a semester, so you can kind of see the pieces floating out there, and they don't have to do a whole lot to kind of fill this roster out, depending on what happens here the next couple of weeks. But yeah, absolutely. To get to the point of your question, I think you absolutely could see a guy like Derek on the floor at the same time as Blaze, and even throw Wilhelm out there as well. Maybe, if you're going to go a super big lineup, put Wilhelm at the 3 and Derek at the 4 and Blaze at the 5, if you want to do that, and throw a couple, you got Sam Griesel, who's a 6'6" guard out there. If Trey McGowan comes back, that's 6'4". You're real big all of a sudden.
They're going from 5 out to 5 in.
Yeah, they're going to play
5 in offense.
5 in the lane offense. We're not sure how it's going to work.
Yeah,
but no, I mean, and that's why I think Fred is going to earn his money next year, because he's going to have some options, and I think they're probably going to do some things differently stylistically. We kind of saw that as the year went on this year. What's that going to look like when they get those guys into the gym and start working with them this summer and get closer to, October, November, when some start playing games? So yeah, I don't think you rule anything out right now. And that includes, having multiple bigs on the floor at the same time. I'll give you just real quick while I'm thinking of it, timeline. I would guess we're going to have an assistant coach announced by the end of next week, Final Four this week. And it could just kind of make sense. Fred can go down there and talk to guys if he hasn't already, and all those sorts of things. As far as players, I think that's still up in the air. I think you'll see the assistant coach thing get worked out first, and then, like you said, you're basically waiting on Lat Mayen and Trey McGowan to make a decision on what they want to do. So we'll see what that looks like going forward. But I think it could be, knock on wood, it could be relatively quiet, after the next couple of weeks. And now those are my famous last words and that's going to happen. But
yeah,
I think you're going to see some things kind of get tied up here over the next week or two.
Interesting. Yeah, well, it'll be I don't know. It always is easy to make a lot of the offseason, and this one's just getting started, but it really is going to be interesting to sort of track and then eventually, hopefully relatively soon, hear from Fred about, how he envisions it all working together.
Should we talk a little football?
Do it.
While we're sitting here. So a couple interesting things, maybe the most interesting thing we've heard in the last couple of weeks has been about the offensive line. Maybe one of the bigger question marks on this team, certainly an area that struggled last year. And we heard Brant Banks earlier this week just talk about, you guys are going to know it when you see it in the spring game, as far as how it looks different. He talked about how they're moving better, how they're getting off the ball better. And Nuri Nueli kind of said the same thing last week, that they're firing off the ball, they're running the ball down. Of course, this is all just Kool-Aid for the masses.
Right.
To chug.
Yeah, 100%.
It's interesting because you have a new O-line coach. You have a unit that really, really struggled last year. And now all of a sudden you're hearing all these, well, we're totally different. We've totally changed. We're going to run the ball and blah, blah, blah. So I guess just, Parker, your take on what you've kind of heard from those guys and how that kind of maybe matches up with what we've seen so far.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, one of the things that Donovan Raiola said from the start was that a big part of offensive line play is playing together and playing with confidence. And obviously there's a lot more that goes into it than that, but the confidence seems to be real. Now, whether the improvement is, we just don't, it's hard to sit here and say like that we know that, because we don't watch practice and it's only the spring, and, it's different it's different going against those guys, Colton Feist and Ty Robinson in practice than it is against playing Wisconsin in, November, or Iowa in November or whatever. So there's a lot, there's a long way to go. There's a lot to figure out and sort out, and they're going to get more guys back healthy, Prohaska and Corcoran, and figure out a top 5, and they might add another guy from the portal and all of that. But I just think it's, all we can do is go off of what they say, and the players seem to be really enjoying what it looks like and how it feels so far in spring. And so that, to me, like the two of the biggest questions on the roster, even with the changeover at quarterback and new guys at running back and receiver and all of that, like the trenches are really what this offseason is about to me, because of, actually both coaches turned over with Tony Tuioti leaving in addition to Greg Austin being fired, but it's really about the succession plan on the defensive line, especially interior on defense. And it's about a lot of new stuff on offense, even though most of the guys are the same. So they're sort of like inverse pictures, but they're both huge question marks. And I don't know. We'll see it, I guess, a week from Saturday, but moreover this fall. But yeah, I find that's sort of the key. It's certainly among the most important things. And so I don't know if you can take a whole lot from what is said on a Wednesday in late March or early April, but I think you can take that those guys feel good about what it looks like at this point.
Yeah. I use the word fascinating a lot, but it's a new coach who when he's in front of the media doesn't say a whole lot, and that's fine. But you talk to those guys that are being coached by him, and it's like he's a dude like behind the scenes. Like they really seem to love him, and he really seems to have infused some different energy into what they're doing. So, will we be able to tell a lot from the spring game? No. Like you said, there's so many injuries there. So many questions on both sides, both offensive line and defensive line. That's going to be hard to tell until you get into it, in the next few months when you get into August, September, that sort of thing. So, yeah, you're right though. It's just really interesting to see what these guys are saying right now and kind of how they feel about the whole thing.
Yep. We'll do a much deeper breakdown of what we expect to see in the spring game, and we'll know a little bit more about the format and all that next week after we hear from Scott Frost on Wednesday. And we'll also next week talk more about the recruiting element, because it's going to be a huge recruiting weekend for Nebraska.
Massive.
But just quickly before we go, Baz, the one guy who we know is going to be on campus is O'Shawn Mathis, who's a transfer edge rusher from TCU, 6'6", 260. And he's a really productive player. He had 9 sacks in 2020, played well last year as well. I think he had 4.5, 14 tackles for loss in 2020. And he's a guy that started 34 games for the Horned Frogs. Now, it's going to be tough to get him. Nebraska is definitely in the mix along with Texas. But he's going to be probably one of the only guys who's taken an official visit and maybe one of the only transfer guys on campus. But big to just get him here, and Nebraska has got a chance between its coaching staff and the NIL operation to make a really strong pitch to him.
What would you put Nebraska's odds of landing O'Shawn at right now?
That's a good question. It depends a little bit on what he's looking for. The opportunity to play, obviously, it's here, and I think Nebraska Texas is ramping up its NIL operation, and obviously they've got the collective of donors down there. But I'm guessing that Nebraska can offer a lot in that regard. And in fact, O'Shawn Mathis took note on Twitter a couple weeks ago. I think it was Sam McEwen from the World Herald tweeted out what Casey Thompson said about Nebraska being a lot further ahead than Texas in NIL, and that piqued O'Shawn Mathis's attention on Twitter. I mean, hard to read too much into a single tweet, but it's going to be part of the recruiting equation going forward. And I think it's going to be very interesting. I think this weekend with the spring game, that's definitely, I think that part of the conversation, I don't know about publicly, but it's certainly ramping up. And I think it's a bigger part of the pitch, or at least as big a part of the pitch as it's ever been going forward for Nebraska.
Could be maybe one of the first real big names that Nebraska, if they pull this off, is able to land with the NIL stuff. Casey Thompson also being among that group too. So it's something to watch for sure. Well, let's kind of mostly wrap it up for this week. We have various things we need to tend to this afternoon, so a little shorter show. Appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll be back probably next Wednesday, Thursday with a new episode for you. We'll preview the spring game, get you all ready, set to go for that. Make sure you're checking out journalstar.com for all the hype, all the information leading up to that, and we'll keep you informed. And until then, we'll talk to you soon.